Welcome to the first episode of Saruwatari Xtreme. Today we'll be taking a look at one of my favorite vehicles, the Aventador SV. The strategy behind the SV is less weight and more power over the standard Aventador. An Aventador going down the road is a fairly uncommon sight to see, and then you take it to the next level with the SV and it's even more rare. You can see by the front nose that it's been completely redesigned to be more aggressive and more aerodynamically efficient. As you move to the back of the car and the rear end, the same theme is continued. It's much more aggressive, very different from the standard Aventador, and of course you've got that insane lower diffuser, which of course is to assist increasing downforce as well. As you move to the top deck lid, there's a very big difference in variance from the standard Aventador. The standard Aventador has active aerodynamics, meaning that it has an incorporated rear wing that's motor controlled and dictated by various engine components, speed. The computers control it raise and lower to increase downforce as the computer sees necessary. On the SV, to continue the theme of reducing weight, it is a solid fixed mount wing, of course constructed out of carbon fiber. It has 3 adjustable settings that the owner can move accordingly to driving conditions that can increase downforce up to 170%. All of these aggressive changes are great if you're going to be tracking the car or racing against your friends, but in the real world, for someone like me who just likes to take this car out on the weekend or the occasional blast through the back roads, it really doesn't mean a whole lot, as I like to drive very slow. And to take advantage of all of the efficiency, increased downforce, reduction in drag, it is very dependent on speed. One of the most notable and desirable features of the Lamborghini V12 flagship cars are the vertical lift scissor doors. And you can find those dating all the way back to the Countach. One of the most important components on any vehicle for visual appearance and individualism are wheels. I prefer to always change my wheels on all my vehicles to aftermarket wheels. Now, truth be told, primarily I'm usually always focusing on individualism. So visual appearance is top-notch for me. So I'm always looking for the wheel that I feel complements the car, also my style, and looks really nice. The SV, however, is a little bit of a different strategy because there was such an enormous effort put forth by Lambo for weight savings and performance. I felt the compelling need to try and follow that theme as much as possible. So I went to go see my friends at DPE and asked them to design a custom wheel that I envisioned in my mind of what I thought would be visually appealing and also provide the most amount of weight savings, with the target goal being a reduction in weight above and beyond what the factory wheels came in at. In most vehicles, usually this isn't a problem to beat the weight, but the SV already comes with forged wheels from the factory. So I asked them to use every strategy they had to reduce weight, remove material in any locations possible without compromising strength. And that is, of course, what they did for me. And this is what they came up with in working with me. And I was very pleased with the results. I asked them to stay with the same factory spec of 20 by 9 in the front and 21 by 13 in the rear. Unfortunately, when all was said and done, things did not work out exactly the way I had planned. On the rear, each wheel had lost a pound. However, on the front, each wheel had gained 1.5 pounds. So I actually had a net gain of 1 pound, if you all things considered. But that is usually the way things go on projects that I'm working on. Of course, the upside is that I was extremely happy because the wheels were exactly the way I wanted them to look. I felt that it was a nice visual enhancement to the SV. And of course, they were able to showcase those ginormous carbon ceramic brakes, which are 400 millimeters on the front and 380 millimeters on the rear. For those of you that are as impatient as myself, I have a tip. Custom wheels are one of the longest components to build. From when the SV was spec'd to delivery in Beverly Hills was around 3 months. A good plan would be to order your custom wheels when you spec your vehicle. This way, the wheels will either be in your possession or on the way when the vehicle lands. This, of course, reducing a ton of anxiety. The entire Aventador line has a multitude of options for aftermarket exhausts. On all of my other vehicles, I have always run an aftermarket exhaust. The SV is a little bit different, and that seems to be following suit to what a lot of manufacturers are doing. They are now offering their own original equipment exhaust upgrade. This exhaust is called the race exhaust, which also recalibrates the ECU. I decided to go this route because of a multitude of reasons. One is warranty. As the cars get exponentially more expensive, manufacturers are more critical of modifications that may have been detrimental in causing a failure. So I really didn't want to have to debate the topic of an aftermarket exhaust causing some sort of component failure, especially when it comes to the engine. Also, the race exhaust is 45 pounds lighter than the standard Aventador unit. One of the most debated topics on any exhaust upgrade is horsepower, gain or loss. Of course, all of us know. The only true way to know is stick the car in the dyno. But horsepower without a great exhaust tone or sound, to me, really means nothing. It's all about the whole driving experience. So if I was to gain power, but the car sounded terrible, it really wouldn't be that important to me. If the exhaust tone and sound enhances the driving experience, if that costs me a little bit of horsepower, I can live with that. I really wouldn't even be able to tell, to be honest with you. I mean, in a car that's making 740 horsepower, even if I really did lose 10 horsepower, I would not be able to tell. If you can tell, then you're much more decisive than I am. The heart of the SV is the 6.5-liter naturally aspirated V12 that puts out 740 horsepower and 507 pounds of torque. This V12 was completely redesigned from that which was used in the flagship V12s of the past. Basically, the Mira, the Countach, the Diablo, and the Murcielago all share the same engine design and architecture. The V12, still being 6.5 liters, same displacement from the Murcielago, was completely redesigned for the Aventador line. One of my favorite details is the V12 badge that lists the cylinder firing order. The most debated component on the SV is the transmission. Most supercar manufacturers have moved on to the dual clutch transmission. That transmission has 3 distinct advantages. 1, lightning fast shifts. 2, ease of drivability. And 3, clutch life. There are really only 2 disadvantages, and one is completely subjective. One is weight and packaging. And the reason why is the dual clutch transmission is essentially 2 transmissions combined into 1. And as far as the second being subjective, the reason why is you're usually at one end of the spectrum or the other. You either like insanely fast shifts that are incredibly smooth, or fast shifts that are quick and hit you in the back extremely hard, much like a manual transmission with the clutch being power shifted. Of course, I tend to lie on this end of the spectrum. That's why I have one of these. But going through the various factors, one is what we talked about, lightning quick shifts. Huge advantage on the track. Drag strip, road course. You all know why. Corners, with the smooth shifts and being so fast, you can downshift later coming into the corner, and you can upshift faster coming out of the corner without disrupting the chassis. The SV, the shifts are so hard, it definitely disrupts the chassis. Now, I've heard a lot of debate of people saying that the dual clutch transmission can be tuned so it will shift hard to emulate that of a single clutch transmission. Maybe it's possible, I just haven't seen it in the cars that I've driven. But if you think about it logically, there's pretty good reason behind it. I mean, basically, you're engaged in one gear and it's spinning, and the next gear is already spinning up. The clutch disengages out of the gear you're in and engages in the next gear, but it's already spinning, which of course is part of the reason it's able to shift so fast. Drivability. If I had to drive this car every day in traffic around town, it would wear on me greatly. And immediately the choice would be apparent to go with the dual clutch transmission. But for me, cruising through the back roads on the weekend, taking the occasional blast, it's more than fine. Now, clutch life. The original single clutch transmissions had tons of issues with clutch life. I own one of the original 355 F1s. On my first clutch, I got 4,000 miles. The burden mostly falls on me because I didn't modify my driving style to accommodate the new technology. Once I had the clutch changed and modified the way I drove, then I didn't really have any other issues. But people still say that plan on a normal F1 or E-gear transmission clutch lasting somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15,000 miles. Now, everything's been reworked on the Aventador, so of course it runs an ISR transmission, independent shift rod transmission. They say the shifts are 50 milliseconds, and of course, at the top of that list, they say that this single clutch will get around 40,000 miles if it's not abused. So that's a huge landmark event. I mean, that basically changes everything greatly because I don't know of very many Aventadors that have 40,000 miles on them. That being said, if I had to drive every day, this definitely would not be the transmission setup I want, but for what I use it for, pure driving enjoyment, it works just great. Modern day supercars just run a ton of computers. It's good and bad. It usually alters the driving experience. In the past, of course, all of us that drive all these cars would basically be solely depending on ourselves. Maybe traction control, but even in some cases, not that. But now, with all the computers, stability control, dynamic control, it's just endless. And every manufacturer has their own different version of what works and doesn't work. Some are better than others. The Aventador line is just like the rest, very, very heavy in electronics. So when you get into the cab, you immediately notice that you have three driving modes: okay? Strada, Sport, and Corsa. We'll just do a quick rundown of each of them. Strada is basically designed for everyday driving, if possible, street driving around town. The car is numbed a bit, in my opinion. It basically has very slow shifts, almost to the point of sluggish, but it works, and everything else is what I would call detuned. Moving to Sport. Sport is a very interesting setting in the way that it pulls back on the traction control and the stability control so you can actually drift the car, power slide. I believe it sends 90% of the power to the rear wheels. That is a pretty significant bias for an all-wheel drive car. It does work very well, I can tell you that myself, but what I don't like about it is the shifts still seem sluggish to me. Then of course, moving up the chain, you go to Corsa. Corsa is specifically designed for track use. However, that is the only way to get the 50 millisecond shifts. And those shifts are just the best. That enhances the driving experience completely. And of course, as we talked about, blasting through the back roads, there's just no match to that. The problem with Corsa is that everything is clamped down. I mean, everything is intervening. The whole purpose is to have the fastest track time. Well, for that, you don't want any slippage. So it's not quite as fun, in my opinion. The perfect combination, or close to perfect combination, would be the stability control and traction control set on Sport, but the shifts set on Corsa. In the regular Aventador and the SV, not a possibility. However, in the Aventador S, in the new Aventador SVJ, there's a mode called Ego Mode, which actually lets you curtail or dial in everything the way that you want. So when we talk about presets, you're talking about only having the latitude of the 3 settings in the SV. When you go to the S or the SVJ, a lot of latitude, because also with Lamborghini's dynamic steering, you can actually choose your setting for the rack, which does make a significant difference. I'm not so sure that it affects the driving experience as much as you would think unless you're on a racetrack, but it definitely does affect the rack and the steering input. And then of course, you have the engine dynamics, the throttle response. This of course runs magnetic suspension, which gives a lot of versatility. So all the suspension can be dialed and controlled in the way you want it. So there's a lot of options available. For me, running Corsa is not quite as fun as it could be, but with some heavy steering angle and a lot of throttle, you can still have a decent amount of fun in Corsa before the computers intervene, most of the time. But even sometimes then, the computers are 5 steps ahead of you. Hopefully that overview of the SV was able to give you some good information on the SV and the regular Aventador. For those of you that are actually looking for an SV or Aventador, I do have some good information on that as well. When I was actually shopping, the first thing on the top of my list was a regular Aventador. At the time, SVs were just unobtainable and there were no allocations left. But luckily, I came across 2 friends, Robert and Ito, from Lamborghini of Beverly Hills, that had access to an allocation. They also allowed me to drive both the regular Aventador and the SV back to back. That was monumental for me because most of the time finding both vehicles I want at one location to try is very difficult. And as all of you know, you test drive one, time goes by, you try and compare and contrast, and it's difficult. But running back to back, I can tell you that both cars for me were phenomenal. And I would be completely fine with a regular Aventador. However, since SVs were difficult to get and they were able to obtain me an allocation, I went ahead and took the lead. I'm happy I did, but just something to pass on to all of you that are looking. So my best advice that I can give you is test drive both if you're interested. Now I see a lot of people and on a lot of the forums to stay away from the 2012 and 2013 because of the transmission leaking or transmission failures and they need to be changed. I don't know that this is all of them. However, if you are the unlucky person that gets one of these failures out of warranty, the cost can just be astronomical. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. But now I'll take out the SV and try and give you some driving perspective. The SV has a ton of mechanical grip with its all-wheel drive system, and the chassis has a bit of understeer when it's pushed hard, but that, again, can be corrected with a more aggressive steering angle and modulating the throttle. me, the driving experience in the SV is like no other. And I hope I was able to convey that through all the in-car footage, driving footage, and of course, the exterior footage, giving you an idea of what type of presence this car has going down the road. To me, it's like no other. And that, of course, is why it's one of my favorite cars. My most favorite aspect of the SV is its look. To me, it just looks amazing. It's big, it's angry, and it always wants to go fast. It makes no apologies and always tells you it wants to go fast. Much different than the Mercy. The Mercy, its predecessor, was big, angry, and you just always felt like it wanted to kill you. Because of all the driver aids that we talked about, the SV has a wide range that can be driven in. Where the edge of that limit is, I don't know, and I don't really care to find out. So, let's now move on and talk about the top 5 questions that people tend to ask me when I'm out and about in this car. And for all of you others that have your own personal stories of experiences, please share them down below in the comments section, because I'm sure that everyone would like to hear what other people have experienced in these types of cars as well. The first question that regularly comes up to me is, what do you do for a living? The plain and simple answer for me is, I'm a farmer. Now, that generates a whole bunch of different responses. Most oftentimes, people will give me that look of wonder of whether or not they are supposed to laugh and that's a joke, or that is a real story. But that is the real story. My actual occupation is a farmer. Not quite as glamorous as race car driver, but it pays the bills. Many of you that drive supercars can relate to this next question. And that is, when I'm in a Lamborghini, why did you get a Lamborghini instead of a Ferrari? To me, the answer is, I already own Ferraris. So I went with this Lamborghini. And talking about the ownership difference between Lamborghini and Ferrari, well, that's a whole nother episode in itself. But it's a constant reminder that people are always curious, and they mean no harm. They just love seeing the cars. So for all of us that have these cars, we should always do our best to try and get them out when we can, because not only do we enjoy the driving experience, we provide a lot of joy to others that see the cars, and it's so rare to see them that it is always exciting. The next question that comes up is, what do you drive every day? Well, sorry to disappoint. Again, getting back to what my occupation is as a farmer, on these muddy roads, doing off-roading in any supercar is not really feasible. So, what do I drive every day? An F-150 Raptor. Another popular question I get most of the time when I'm fueling is, how many miles per gallon does this car get? People are shocked when I give them the answer, and I tell them, this car gets 4 to 7 miles per gallon. The look on their face is priceless. But my theory, of course, is, if you can't afford the fuel, you really shouldn't be driving the car. Out of all the questions that are ever asked to me, this question is by far always the most disappointing to people that ask. And that question is, do you get a lot of girls with this car? No, absolutely not. That is the truth. And in fact, out of all the years that I've collected supercars and enjoyed them, I've always enjoyed them for the driving experience. I have not been hit on or picked up on by one girl, or even picked up any girls in these cars. So please, those of you that have had these experiences, please comment below so the rest of us can all live vicariously through you, because for us, at least for me, it's not that exciting. That concludes the first episode covering the driving experience of the SV. And I hope I was able to convey somewhat of what it's like to be able to experience it on the road, some of the technical aspects of it, and also some details involving ownership. On the channel, I'll be covering various different supercars and exotic cars, trying to do the same thing, conveying to you the driving experience, but also giving some information on owning and the trials and tribulations of these supercars. If you like what you saw or you're interested in seeing what I got in the future, please subscribe down below. And thanks again for watching.